Is a 13-year-old boy sitting on the steps of a railroad station, and he is crying his heart out. He's sitting next to this battered, beat up, old, borrowed trunk, tied shut with rope because it's too old to have any locks or handles anymore. Now, I want you to know, it took a lot for this kid, this 13-year-old boy, to get to those steps. To get so close to getting on a train to the next chapter of his life, only to be pulled up short by deep injustice and shallow pettiness, which so often walk hand in hand. See, this is 1912 or 1913. It's the Daytona Beach, Florida. And this kid is black. And he's just trying to get to high school. And that isn't as easy as it sounds to us sitting here today. Daytona Beach didn't have a high school for black kids. See, the schools for black children only went through 7th grade. And you had to finish 8th grade to go to high school. So if they didn't finish 8th grade, they didn't have to build high schools for the black kids. But this kid's principal took an interest in him. He saw something. And so he took the time, one-on-one, to teach this kid the 8th grade curriculum. And then he went to the superintendent and said, I have a black child who is ready for the 8th grade exams. And even though those exams were administered by a white superintendent, the kid passed, and he got to go to high school. But the closest school was in Jacksonville, a train ride away. And that brings us back to the steps of that train station. Because when this kid got there, carrying the trunk, just a couple of dollars in his pocket, he went up to the agent, bought his ticket, and the agent, a white man, told him, you can't check that trunk. To check a trunk, I have to be able to tie the ticket to a handle. The rope doesn't count. You're going to have to send that express separate. And he knew damn well this kid didn't have the money to do that. This kid only had $1 and a few cents left over. So there the boy sat. And I'll let this young man finish the story in his words. Presently, I opened my eyes and saw before me this large pair of work shoes. My eyes crawled upward until I saw the man's face. He was a black man dressed in overalls and a denim cap. And he looked down at me, he rolled a cigarette and lit it, and then he said, boy, what in hell are you crying about? So I told him, if you're trying to get out of this damn town, to get an education, the least I can do is help you. Come with me. He took me around to the agent and he asked, how much does it take to send this boy's trunk to Jacksonville? Then he took out his rawhide money bag, counted the money out. When the agent handed him the receipt, he handed it to me, and then, without a word, he turned and disappeared down the railroad track. I never saw him again. And that desperate 13-year-old boy who just wanted to go to high school, that was Howard Thurman. Now, Howard Thurman, Laura mentioned him last week in her sermon. Howard Thurman grew up to become the theologian, the mystic, the minister, the teacher who wrote Jesus and the Disinherited, one of 3 books, legend has it, that Martin Luther King Jr. carried with him whenever he traveled. Thurman was one of the great minds and one of the wisest hearts of the 20th century, a mentor to leaders of the civil rights movement. And all of that could have been cut off at that Florida rail station, if not for one man, a stranger who saw an injustice he could do something about, and so did it. So for me, this story, it isn't about Howard Thurman. It's about that stranger. And through him, about us. I mean, look, this was 1912 or 1913 in America, in the southern part of America. Not that we in the North were exactly innocent on institutional racism, white supremacy, and just generally being terrible. But the institution of racial segregation, of that farce of separate but equal, the grand machine of oppression was so vast that that man couldn't possibly have imagined toppling it. I mean, a few decades earlier, Unitarian Theodore Parker preached about the moral arc of the universe, that he couldn't see where it went, but that it bends toward justice. Maybe it does. I hope, I believe that it does, or at least that it can. But in that moment, at that train station, that black man in Florida couldn't see where that arc could possibly bend to the end of segregation. That possibility was so far beyond his horizon that he might not have even thought to bother looking for it. But he did the thing he could. He planted a seed. With no way of knowing that that seed would grow into the mind, the heart, the soul of the man who would inspire the civil rights movement. No way of knowing his small act would change the world. Maybe it might, says the little girl from our story. And it might not. It's worth doing either way. And there is the lesson, or at least a lesson, I take from that man who helped a kid he didn't even know and just walked away. Although I do like to imagine that as he walked away, he had a little bit of a smirk for kicking this agent in the shins. Metaphorically speaking, of course. There's the lesson. Do the thing you can do. The thing in front of you. Not because you'll be the hero who changes the world, who rights the great wrongs, but because you can. A step is not the destination. What I worry about, what I have been guilty of, is that we can get so focused on the destination that unless we think we're going to reach it, unless we think that the action we might take, that we could take, will be the thing that pushes us all across the finish line into that glorious land of justice and equity, wherever the hell that is. Unless we think we're going to have that big of an impact, we just might not do it. Why bother? It's not worth it. Most of the time, that finish line is so far away. Even if we can see it, it's on a horizon that seems unreachable and seems to keep moving. Homelessness, climate change, hunger, war, white supremacy, homophobia, and transphobia, gun violence. Take your pick. The solution to any of the world's great disparities and inequities and injustices seems so very far away. Because it is. But that isn't hopelessness you hear in my voice. Because it is the sin of resignation to let that distance stop us in our tracks. It is the sin of hubris, of ego, to think we should be the ones to come along and save the day. And I, my friends, have been guilty of both sins. But maybe, just maybe, we shouldn't think of justice as a goal to be accomplished, a destination to be reached, a destination that it can feel like we will never reach. On the road from greed to giving, we sang in our call to worship this morning. Listen to those words. On the road from greed to giving. Not at giving. It is along the road that love guides us. Step by step. See, a step, now that's something we can do. Now, one of my classmates at seminary defined justice in a way that struck me so much that I circled it in my notes. It honestly may have been the only notes I took in class that day. This is what she said. The world is unfair. And anything I can do to make the world more fair is justice to me. Make the world more fair? Well, we can do that. Unfortunately, it's still kind of a low bar. I mean, not only can we do that, we are already doing that. Laura spoke last week about the things people in this community are doing to make the world more fair. About Polly bringing tarps and blankets to homeless encampments. Is that solving homelessness? No. But Polly is making the world a little better, a little more fair, a little warmer for some people that night. And she is inspiring me to realize there are such simple steps I could do to help a problem that looks so immense. When an inmate took the time to teach another man in prison fractions, to show him that he could learn fractions, both men remained in prison. And the prison system remains a complicated mess that embodies a great deal of injustice. But a man's sense of worthiness, of his own humanity, expanded a little in that space. Maybe even a lot. And led him to do the same thing for another man in another prison. Our support, with Lori's coordination, of a family from Guatemala doesn't put an end to the violence in that country or to the injustice of the U.S. immigration system. But a family has a home, has help navigating a new country and a new culture. They are safe. They are seen. Carol Whitman writing letters to editors and members of Congress, helping others craft their own letters. Look, they aren't sweeping away all the problems that need solving with the stroke of their pen. Or probably more accurately, the click of their keyboard, but stroke of their pen sounds more poetic. But in the words of this morning's opening reading, they remind people in power who could make bigger changes that we shall not be silent. Our voices must be heard. And if our voices are loud enough or persistent enough, sometimes they might even manage to summon the mythical Congressive bird Birtlebear to swoop across the night sky and help us take one big step toward justice. I mean, every now and then, it's hard to imagine these days, it actually happens. The Civil Rights Act, legalization of gay marriage, Obamacare. But we can't count on that, not on a regular basis. Most of the time, justice, the quest for a more equitable world, a more flourishing world in the words of our mission statement here at MSUS, is just one step at a time. Or maybe lots of little steps by lots of people, all of them knowing there will be more to do, because even when we get those big, giant steps from the Congressive Birtlebear, I don't have it written down here, the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act, and any of those big steps are still only steps. A step is not a destination. We'll build a promised land that can be. I do love that hymn, but its message is a little wrong. It's just a titch off. Justice isn't about that promised land that can be, that we could reach at some imagined time in some imagined place. Justice has to be about the land, the world that is. Justice is in the things we are doing to build that land here and now around us while we're living in it. It is building the plane while it flies. Knowing that that land is always going to be a work in progress. That it is, like every one of us, never complete and never perfect. So, my incomplete and imperfect friends, let us not seek justice, not wait to get it just right. Let us do justice as best we can, where we can, when we can, for the people we can. We cannot save the world in one big fell swoop, but we can make the pieces of that world where we live a little more fair. And then a little more, and a little more, and a little more. Amen. May it be so, because we make it so.